On September 19th, 2012, a video would be posted on the Sky Does Minecraft YouTube channel reviewing a creepypasta Minecraft mod. This video was nothing special, just a short, simple showcase of a now outdated mod which added several iconic horror characters from the internet into Minecraft. To your average person, this video would be completely irrelevant. It was a short review done by a now deplatformed content creator back in a much more simple era of YouTube where these kinds of videos were so commonplace you'd probably seen it a million times. However, the reason I bring it up to you right now was because this video was my introduction to the horror genre. I know how that sounds, but bear with me here. Growing up, I had very limited internet access, and everything I had watched on YouTube, thankfully, was heavily monitored by my parents because they always worried I would expose myself to some kind of adult content. What this meant for me was that I'd spent many of those formative years never seeing a lot of horror content that was now commonplace. What I was allowed to watch, though, was Minecraft content, and oh boy, did I watch a lot of it. I would stay up as long as I'd be allowed, eyes glued to the screen, watching video after video, and that was what eventually led to me finding and watching this very upload. The characters and concepts discussed in this goofy little mod review were admittedly very tame, but to my 8-year-old, undeveloped, innocent brain, they were the most horrifying things I'd ever seen. A smiling dog photo that haunted your nightmares, a faceless tuxedo-wearing entity that killed you if you stared at him, and at the forefront of this video, a smiling serial killer in a bloody white hoodie. This is Jeff the Killer, the character who appeared first in this video, acting as my first ever introduction to the massive world that is the horror genre. This guy right here, this silly ass sweater wearing Joker ripoff of a character, was my proper introduction to horror before anyone else. Before I saw the likes of Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees, I was staying up at night staring out my window, terrified that Jeff the Killer would show up and kill me in my sleep. This video and the character it chose to focus on had a permanent, lasting impact on me during those long, early years of my childhood. Because after I had seen it, after I got a taste of what it meant to truly be afraid of something, I became addicted to that feeling. Every opportunity I got where I felt as though my parents wouldn't find out, I scoured the internet trying to learn more about these characters and stories. I read them religiously, learning about ideas and concepts that horrified me, but I continued to pursue regardless. The most prevalent aspect of this obsession being with the one who started it all, Jeff the Killer. To say this character is important to me is a massive understatement. For as long as I've been a horror fan, I've had this character to thank for it, for better or for worse. And that is why, despite his rocky history, I had always wanted to make a video that explored every version of the story that had ever been made. And with the fortunate success of my own rewriting of the character, I figured this creepypasta event I have been doing would be the perfect opportunity to finally do so. And so that is exactly what I plan to do. In this video, we are going to explore the very complicated history of one of the internet's most infamous horror icons. I am going to look at every version of the story that has ever been made, going into the history behind them and giving my honest thoughts. So, if you're ready for another long video full of my own intense, neurodivergent ramblings, then get ready, because that's what you've just signed up for. Without further ado, let's delve into the history of Jeff the Killer. Our story begins with a little creepypasta that was posted in the year 2011 by Game Fuel TV. The story was titled Jeff the Killer, and it would have an impact on the culture of internet horror forever in a way that the author never could have predicted. The story was simple, a cautionary tale about the effects of bullying on a young child, with a haunting photo tied to it that would become just as, if not more, iconic than the story itself. What was it about Jeff the Killer that made this story so iconic? What about it resonated with so many people? When reading the story, one is going to ask that question a lot, because oh my god, is this story terrible. Yeah, like, cut the spooky music, cut the dramatic narration, because I have no intention of sugarcoating it.
Yeah, this story is bad, like beyond bad. I may have said at the start that I was scared of it when I first read it, but I was also 8 years old at the time and had quite literally nothing to compare it to.
Looking at this from an objective, critical lens, there is nearly nothing redeemable to be found in this story. It is a ridiculous, poorly written mess that reads more as the author's power fantasy than a work of horror. That being said, if you look at it through the lens of a comedy, it is genuinely one of the funniest things that you can read on the internet. Of course, much of my love of Jeff the Killer comes from the insane amount of nostalgia I have for it, but I would be lying to you if I didn't also tell you it was because I cannot read this story without bursting out laughing. It is campy in a way that is impossible to describe without me just reading the entire story to you. Which is exactly what I am going to do. Yeah, to give you all at home an idea of what we're getting into with this character and his stories, I made the executive decision to record a full narration of the 2011 Jeff the Killer with a couple of my friends. What you are about to hear is that recording, with some fitting background music added in for the sake of the atmosphere. I hope you all enjoy the terrifying tale that is the original 2011 Jeff the Killer. Excerpt from a local newspaper. Ominous unknown killer is still at large. After weeks of unexplained murders, the ominous unknown killer is still on the rise. After little evidence has been found, a young boy states that he survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely tells his story.
I had a bad dream, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw that for some reason the window was open, even though I remember it being closed before I went to bed. I got up and shut it once more. Afterwards, I simply crawled under my covers and tried to go back to sleep. That's when I had a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up and nearly jumped out of my bed. There, in the little ray of light illuminating from between my curtains, were a pair of two eyes. These weren't regular eyes, they were dark, ominous eyes. They were bordered in black and just plain out terrified me. That's when I saw his mouth, a long, horrendous smile that made every hair on my body stand up. The figure stood there, watching me. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he said it, a simple phrase, but said in a way only a madman could speak. He said,
"Go to sleep."
I let out a scream. That's what sent him at me. He pulled up a knife, aiming at my heart. He jumped on top of my bed. I fought him back. I kicked, I punched, I rolled around trying to knock him off of me. That's when my dad busted in. The man threw the knife. It went into my dad's shoulder. The man probably would have finished him off if one of the neighbors hadn't alerted the police. They drove into the parking lot and ran towards the door. The man turned and ran down the hallway. I heard a smash, like glass breaking. As I came out of my room, I saw the window that was pointing towards the back of my house was broken. I looked out it to see him vanish into the distance. I can tell you one thing, I will never forget that face. Those cold, evil eyes and that psychotic smile, they will never leave my head.
Police are still looking for this man. If you see anyone that fits the description in this story, please contact your local police department. Jeff and his family had just moved into a new neighborhood. His dad had gotten a promotion. That's not the story being bad. That's just me being bad at reading. His dad had gotten a promotion at work, and they thought it would be the best for them, oh my God, to live in one of those fancy neighborhoods. Jeff and his brother Lou couldn't complain though. A new, better house? What was not to love? As they were getting unpacked, one of their neighbors came by.
Hello. I'm Barbara. I live across the street from you. Well, I just wanted to introduce myself and introduce my son.
Hi.
That's not your line. That's not your line. She turns around and calls her son over.
Billy! These are our new neighbors.
Hi.
Billy said hi and ran back to play in his yard.
Well, I'm Margaret, and this is my husband Peter, and my 2 sons, Jeff and Lou.
They each introduced themselves, and then Barbara invited them to her son's birthday party. Jeff and his brother were about to object when their mother said that they would love to. When Jeff and his family are done packing, Jeff went up to his mom. Okay.
Mom, why would you invite us to some kids' party? If you haven't noticed, I'm not some dumb kid.
Jeff, we just moved here. We should show that we want to spend time with our neighbors. Now we're going to that party, and that's final.
Jeff started to talk, but stopped himself, knowing that he couldn't do anything. Whenever his mom said something, it was final. He walked up to his room and plopped down on his bed. He sat there looking at his ceiling when suddenly, he got a weird feeling. Not so much a pain, but a weird feeling. He dismissed it as just some random feeling. He heard his mother call him down to get his stuff, and he walked down to get it. The next day, Jeff walked downstairs to get breakfast and got ready for school. As he sat there eating his breakfast, he once again got that feeling. This time it was stronger. It gave him a slight tugging pain, but he once again dismissed it. As he and Lou finished breakfast, they walked down to the bus stop. They sat there waiting for the bus, and then, all of a sudden, some kid on a skateboard jumped over them, only inches above their laps. They both jumped back in surprise.
Hey, what the hell?
The kid landed and turned back to them. He kicked his skateboard up and caught it in his hands. The kid seemed to be about 12, 1 year younger than Jeff. He wears an Aeropostale shirt and ripped blue jeans. Why is sometimes it's written in the present tense, sometimes... In fact, this is your dialogue.
Oh, that's me? It didn't say my name. Well, well, well. It looks like we got some new meat.
Suddenly, 2 other kids appeared. One was super skinny and the other was huge.
Well, since you're new here, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Over there is Keith.
Jeff and Lou looked over at the skinny kid. He had a dopey face that you would expect a sidekick to have.
And he's Troy.
They looked over at the fat kid. Talk about a tub of lard. This kid looked like he hadn't exercised since he was crawling.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
Man, that's mean.
And that fat ass over there is Troy.
You see that fat piece of shit?
That bastard's Troy. God, do I hate him.
I don't know what the author's problem was with overweight people, but oh my god, the vitriol
That's
they had
just
when describing
cruel.
Troy.
I'm
I know.
willing to bet the author actively had 3 bullies who looked just like this. He's just taken out all his pent-up rage through writing with them.
I know, it's so, he was so cruel to Troy. I feel so bad. All right, Randy, you're up.
And I am Randy. Now, for all the kids in this neighborhood, there's a small price for bus fare, if you catch my drift.
Lou stood up, ready to punch the light out of the kid's eyes when one of his friends pulled a knife on him.
I had hoped you would be more cooperative, but it seems we have to do this the hard way.
The kid walked up to Lou and took his wallet out of his pocket. Jeff got that feeling again. Now it was truly strong, a burning sensation. He stood up, but Lou gestured for him to sit down. Jeff ignored him and walked up to the kid.
Listen here, you little punk. Give back my bro's wallet or else.
Randy put the wallet in his pocket and pulled out his own knife.
Oh, and what will you do?
Just as he finished the sentence, Jeff popped the kid in the nose. As Randy reached for his face, Jeff grabbed the kid's wrist and broke it. Randy screamed and Jeff grabbed the knife from his hand. Troy and Keith rushed Jeff, but Jeff was too quick. He threw Randy to the ground. Keith lashed out at him, but Jeff ducked and stabbed him in the arm. Keith dropped his knife and fell to the ground screaming. Troy rushed him too, but Jeff didn't even need the knife. He just punched Troy straight in the stomach and Troy went down. As he fell, he puked all over. Lou could do nothing but look in amazement at Jeff.
Jeff, how did you...
That was all he said. They saw the bus coming and knew they'd be blamed for the whole thing. They started running as fast as they could. As they ran, they looked back and saw the bus driver rushing over to Randy and the others. As Jeff and Lou made it to school, they didn't dare tell what happened. All they did was sit and listen. Lou just thought of that as his brother beating up a few kids, but Jeff knew it was more. It was something scary. As he got that feeling, he felt how powerful it was, the urge to just hurt someone. He didn't like how it sounded, but he couldn't help feeling happy. He felt that strange feeling go away and stay away for the entire day of school. Even as he walked home due to the whole thing near the bus stop, and how now he probably wouldn't be taking the bus anymore, he felt happy. When he got home, his parents asked how his day was, and he said in a somewhat ominous voice,
It was a wonderful day.
Next morning, he heard a knock at his front door. He walked down to find 2 police officers at the door, his mother looking back at him with an angry look.
Jeff, these officers tell me that you attacked 3 kids, that it wasn't regular fighting, and that they were stabbed. Stabbed, son.
Jeff's gaze fell to the floor, showing his mother that it was true.
Mom, they were the ones who pulled the knives on me and Lou.
Son, we found 3 kids, 2 stabbed, 1 having a bruise on his stomach, and we have witnesses providing that you fled the scene. Now what does that tell us?
Jeff knew it was no use. He could say him and Lou had been attacked, but then there was no proof it was not them who attacked first. They couldn't say that they weren't... Oh yeah, because the truth be told, they were. So Jeff couldn't defend himself or Lou.
Son, call down your brother.
Jeff couldn't do it, since it was him who beat up all the kids.
Sir, it was me. I was the one who beat up the kids. Lou tried to hold me back, but he couldn't stop me.
The cop looked at his partner, and they both nodded.
Well, kid, looks like a year in juvie.
Wait!
Says Lou. They all look up to see him holding a knife. The officers pulled their guns and locked them on Lou.
It was me! I beat up those little punks. I have the marks to prove it.
He lifted up his sleeves to reveal cuts and bruises as if he was in a struggle.
Son, put the knife down,
said the officer. Lou held up the knife and dropped it to the ground. He put his hands up and walked over to the cops.
No, Lou, it was me. I did it.
Jeff had tears running down his face.
Bro, trying to take the blame for what I did. Well, take me away.
The police led Lou out to the patrol car.
Lou, tell them it was me. Tell them. I was the one who beat up those kids.
Jeff's mother put her hand on his shoulders.
Jeff, please. You don't have to lie. We know it's Lou. You can stop.
Jeff watched helplessly as the cop car speeds off with Lou inside. A few minutes later, Jeff's dad pulled into the driveway, seeing Jeff's face and knowing something was wrong.
Son, what is it?
Bro.
Jeff couldn't answer. His vocal cords were strained from crying. Instead, Jeff's mother walked his father inside to break the bad news to him as Jeff wept in the driveway. After an hour or so, Jeff walked back into the house, seeing that his parents were both shocked, sad, and disappointed. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't see how they thought of Lou when it was his fault. He just went to sleep, trying to get the whole thing off his mind. 2 days went by with no word from Lou at JDC. No friends to hang out with, nothing but sadness and guilt. That is until Saturday, when Jeff is woke up by his mother with a happy, sunshiny face.
Jeff, it's the day,
she said as she opened up the curtains and let light flood into the room.
What's today?
Asked Jeff as he stirs awake.
Why, it's Billy's party.
He was now fully awake.
Mom, you're joking, right? You don't expect me to go to some kid's party after...
There was a long pause.
Jeff, we both know what happened. I think this party could be the thing that brightens up the past days. Now get dressed.
Jeff's mother walked out of the room and downstairs to get ready herself. He fought himself to get up. He picked out a random shirt and pair of jeans and walked downstairs. He saw his mother and father all dressed up, his mother in a dress and his father in a suit. He thought, why would they ever wear such fancy clothes to a kid's party?
Son, is that all you're going to wear?
Said Jeff's mom.
Better than wearing too much,
he said. His mother pushed down the feeling to yell at him and hid it with a smile.
Now, Jeff, we may be overdressed, but this is how you go if you want to make an impression.
Said his father. Jeff grunted and went back up to his room.
I don't have any fancy clothes!
He yelled downstairs.
Just pick out something.
Called his mother. He looked around his closet for what he would call fancy. He found a pair of black dresses he had for special occasions and an undershirt. He couldn't find a shirt to go with it though. He looked around and found only striped and patterned shirts, none of which go with dress pants. Finally, he found a white hoodie and put it on.
You're wearing that?
They both said. His mother looked at her watch.
Oh, no time to change. Let's just go.
She said as she herded Jeff and his father out the door. They crossed the street over to Barbara and Billy's house. They knocked on the door, and at it appeared that Barbara, just like his parents, way overdressed. As they walked inside, all Jeff could see were adults, no kids.
The kids are out in the yard. Jeff, how about you go meet some of them?
Said Barbara. Jeff walked outside to a yard full of kids. They were running around in weird cowboy costumes and shooting each other with plastic guns. He might as well be standing in a Toys R Us. Product placement. Suddenly, a kid came up with him and handed him a toy gun and hat.
Hey, wanna play?
He said.
No, kid. I'm way too old for this stuff.
The kid looked at him with that weird puppy dog face.
Please.
Said the kid.
Fine.
Said Jeff. He put on the hat and started to pretend shoot at the kids. At first, he thought it was totally ridiculous, but then he started to actually have fun. It might not have been super cool, but it was the first time he had done something that took his mind off of Lou. So he played with the kids for a while until he heard a noise. A weird rolling noise. Then it hit him. Randy, Troy, and Keith all jumped over the fence on their skateboards. Jeff dropped the fake gun and ripped off the hat. Randy looked at Jeff with a burning hatred.
Hello, Jeff, is it? We have some unfinished business.
Jeff saw his bruised nose.
I think we're even. I beat the crap out of you, and you get my brother sent to JDC.
Randy got an angry look in his eyes.
Oh no, I don't go for even. I go for winning. You may have kicked our asses that one day, but not today.
As he said that, Randy rushed at Jeff. They both fell to the ground. Randy punched Jeff in the nose, and Jeff grabbed him by the ears and headbutted him. Jeff pushed Randy off of him, and both rose to their feet. Kids were screaming, and parents were running out of the house. Troy and Keith both pulled out guns out of their pockets.
No one interrupts or guts will fly.
They said. Randy pulled a knife on Jeff and stabbed him in his shoulder. Jeff screamed and fell to his knees. Randy started kicking him in the face. After 3 kicks, Jeff grabs his foot and twists it, causing Randy to fall to the ground. Jeff stood up and walked towards the back door. Troy grabbed him.
You need some help?
He picks up he picks up Jeff by the back of the collar and throws him through the patio door. As Jeff tries to stand, he's kicked down to the ground. Randy repeatedly starts kicking Jeff until he starts to cough up blood.
Come on, Jeff, fight me.
He picks up Jeff and throws him into the kitchen. Randy sees a bottle of vodka on the counter and smashes the glass over Jeff's head.
Fight!
He throws Jeff back into the living room.
Come on, Jeff, look at me.
Jeff glances up, his face riddled with blood.
I was the one who got your brother sent to JDC, and now you're just gonna sit here and let him rot in there for the whole year? You should be ashamed.
Jeff starts to get up.
Oh, finally, you stand and fight.
Jeff is now to his feet, blood and vodka on his face. Once again, he gets that strange feeling, the one in which he hasn't felt for a while.
Finally, he's up,
says Randy as he runs at Jeff. That's when it happens. Something inside Jeff snaps. His psyche is destroyed. All rational thinking is gone. All he can do is kill. He grabs Randy and pile drives him to the ground. He gets on top of him and punches him straight in the heart. The punch causes Randy's heart to stop. As Randy gasps for breath, Jeff hammers down on him. Punch after punch, blood gushes from Randy's body until he takes one final breath and dies. Everyone is looking at Jeff now. The parents, the crying kids, even Troy and Keith. Although they easily break from their gaze and point their guns at Jeff. Jeff sees the guns trained on him and runs for the stairs. As he runs, Troy and Keith let out fire on him, each shot missing. Jeff runs up the stairs. He hears Troy and Keith follow up behind. As they let out their final rounds of bullets, Jeff ducks into the bathroom. He grabs the towel rack and rips it off the wall. Troy and Keith race in, knives ready. Troy swings his knife at Jeff, who backs away and bangs the towel rack into Troy's face. Troy goes down hard, and now all that's left is Keith. He's more agile than Troy is, and ducks when Jeff swings the towel rack. He dropped the knife and grabbed Jeff by the neck. He pushed him into the wall. A thing of bleach fell down on top of him from the top shelf. It burned both of them, and they both started screaming. Jeff wiped his eyes as best as he could. He pulled back the towel rack and swung it straight into Keith's head. As they lie there, bleeding to death, he let out an ominous smile. That's not English.
What's so funny?
Asked Jeff. Keith pulled out a lighter and switched it on.
What's funny is that you're covered in bleach and alcohol.
Oh,
Jeff's
shit.
eyes widened as Keith threw the lighter at him. As soon as the flame made contact with him, the flames ignited the alcohol in the vodka. While the alcohol burned him, the bleach bleached his skin. Jeff let out a terrible screech as he caught on fire. He tried to... Thank you. He tried to roll out the fire, but it was no use. The alcohol made him into a walking inferno. He ran down the hall and fell down the stairs. Everybody started screaming as they saw Jeff, now a man on fire, drop to the ground, nearly dead. The last thing Jeff saw was his mother and the other parents trying to extinguish the flame. That's when he passed out. When Jeff woke, he had a cast wrapped around his face. He couldn't see anything, but he felt a cast on his shoulder and stitches all over his body. He tried to stand up, but he realized that there was some kind of tube in his arm, and when he tried to get up, it fell out and a nurse rushed in.
I don't think you can get out of bed just yet.
She said as she put him back in his bed and reinserted the tube. Jeff sat there with no vision, no idea of what his surroundings were. Finally, after hours, he heard his mother.
Honey, are you okay?
She asked. Jeff couldn't answer though. His face was covered, and he was unable to speak.
Oh, honey, I have great news. After all the witnesses told the police that Randy confessed of trying to attack you, they decided to let Lou go.
This made Jeff almost bolt up, stopping halfway, remembering the tube coming out of his arm.
He'll be up by tomorrow, and then you two will be able to be together again.
Jeff's mother hugs Jeff and says her goodbyes. The next couple of weeks were those where Jeff was visited by his family. Then came the day where the bandages were removed. His family were all there to see it, what he would look like. As the doctors unwrapped the bandages from Jeff's face, everyone was on the edge of their seats. They waited until the last bandage holding the cover over his face was almost removed.
Let's hope for the best,
said the doctor. He quickly pulls the cloth, letting the rest fall from Jeff's face. Jeff's mother screams at the sight of his face. Lou and Jeff's dad stare... Thank you. Lou and Jeff's dad stare awestruck at his face.
What? What happened to my face?
Jeff said. He rushed out of bed and ran to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw the cause of the distress. His face, it's horrible. His lips were burnt to a deep shade of red. His face was turned into a pure white color, and his hair singed from brown to black. Yeah, a shout out to his hair being burnt black, like the fire was hair dye. He slowly put his hand to his face. He had a sort of leathery feel to it now. He looked back at his family, then back at the mirror.
Jeff, it's not that bad.
Not that bad?
It's perfect.
His family were equally surprised. Jeff started laughing uncontrollably. His parents noticed that his left eye and hand were twitching.
Jeff, are you okay?
Okay, I've never felt more happy.
Bro. All right.
You're not done yet.
I know.
Look at me. This face goes perfectly with me.
He couldn't stop laughing. He stroked his face, feeling it. Looking at it in the mirror. What caused this? Well, you may recall. Oh, yeah, shout out to when the narrator directly starts talking to the audience. What caused this? Well, you may recall that when Jeff was fighting Randy, something in his mind, his sanity, snapped. Now, he was left as a crazy killing machine. That is, his parents didn't know.
Doctor, is my son all right, in the head?
Oh, yeah. This behavior.
Sorry. Why is he high? Why is he high?
Dude, shout out to Joe Swanson for making a guest appearance.
Mom, I don't trust this guy.
I don't even know how I did that. How did I do that?
Oh yeah,
It's all coming together.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's normal.
Okay.
This behavior is typical for patients that have taken very large amounts of painkillers. If his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here and we'll give him a psychological test.
Oh, thank you, doctor. Do you want me to continue from there?
Jeff's mother went over to Jeff.
Credits
Jeff,
roll.
sweetie, it's time to go.
Jeff looks away from the mirror. His face still formed into a crazy smile.
Gay, mommy.
His mother looked.
I'm so uncomfortable.
His mother took him by the shoulder. His mother took him by the shoulder and took him to get his clothes. "This is what came in," said the lady at the desk. Jeff's mom looked down to see the black dress pants and white hoodie her son wore. Now they were clean of blood and now stitched together. Jeff's mother led him to his room and made him put on his clothes. Then they left, not knowing that this was their final day of life. Later that night, Jeff's mother woke to a sound coming from the bathroom. It sounded as if someone was crying. She slowly walked over to see what it was. When she looked into the bathroom, she saw a horrendous sight. Jeff had taken a knife and carved a smile into his cheeks.
Jeff, what are you doing?
Asked his mom. Why does she just sound like mildly irritated?
What are you doing?
Wait,
You're not doing this shit again, are you?
I can try to make it sound more like concerned. Jeff, what are you doing?
Asked his mother. Jeff looked over his shoulder at his mother.
I couldn't keep smiling, mommy. It hurt after a while. Now,
I can smile forever.
Jeff's mother noticed his eyes, ringed in black.
Jeff, your eyes.
Jeff's eyes were seemingly never closing.
I couldn't see my face. I got tired, and my eyes started to close. I burned out the eyelids, so I could forever see myself, my new face.
Jeff's mother slowly started to back away, seeing that her son was going insane.
What's wrong, mommy? Aren't I beautiful?
Yes, son. Yes, you are. Let me go get Daddy so he can see your face.
She ran into the room and shook Jeff's dad from his sleep.
Honey, get the gun.
She stopped as she saw Jeff in the doorway holding a knife.
Mommy, you lied.
That's the last thing they hear as Jeff rushes them with the knife, gutting both of them. His brother Lou woke up, startled by some noise. He didn't hear anything else, so he just shut his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. As he was on the border of slumber, he got the strangest feeling that someone was watching him. He looked up before Jeff's hand covered his mouth. He slowly raised the knife, ready to plunge it into Lou. Lou thrashed here and there, trying to escape Jeff's grip.
Shh. Just go to sleep.
No.
No.
The two opposing sides going to sleep and saying no.
So that, my viewer, was the original Jeff the Killer. Now, comedy aside, after hearing that, you are probably wondering how this story somehow managed to achieve the iconography it has on the internet. I mean, this terrible story became so famous that it rivaled the likes of Slender Man, a character who has starred in several phenomenal works of horror over the years, and some less than stellar entries, despite being the main villain of a story that reads like a 10-year-old's fanfiction. And I do have quite a few theories as to how that came to be. My main theory being the fact that Jeff the Killer, regardless of the quality of his story, when you think about it, is the quintessential creepypasta character. He is the star of a nice and simple story about a serial killer with a scary face that sneaks into your house and kills you in your sleep. The entire point of creepypastas as stories are to serve as these spooky internet urban legends that could be spread around to scare people. And with a premise like that, it would be very easy to convince some people that a character like this exists and he's out there looking for more victims. Combine that with the spooky photo of him that is attached to every reading, and you have a character who had become far bigger than the terrible story he was attached to. Jeff as an idea was what people latched onto, not the story itself. And when you take that into consideration, it makes a lot more sense how this story and character managed to find themselves in the Internet Horror Hall of Fame right next to iconic characters like Slender Man, Smile Dog, and The Rake. Then, of course, there were also just the fangirls who found him hot, but let's not talk about them right now. Let's not talk about them. Regardless of your opinion of it, whether you love it ironically, unironically, or hate it downright, there is no denying the impact this story ended up having on the internet. As one of the first major creepypasta stories that would be made, Jeff the Killer would inspire many, many more original works that would follow it. Which is why, despite its iconic status, I am surprised by how little people are actually aware of the fact that this story is a work of plagiarism. Yeah, so we're only at the start of this journey, and I'm already throwing a curveball at y'all, because the story that I just read to all of you, the 2011 Jeff the Killer that propelled this character into the spotlight, was actually plagiarized from another story that shared its title from only a few years prior. So, let's take a look at the original story that truly started it all. Jeff the Killer from 2008. On the 14th of August, 2008, a thread simply titled, "Hi, I'm Killer Jeff," was posted to Newgrounds. This was the first mention of Jeff the Killer that had ever happened on the internet, and in the days following, several posts would be made to 4chan with the intent of explaining who this character was. After the 4chan and Newgrounds threads, a video would be posted to a YouTube channel sharing the same name of Killer Jeff, where more of the character's lore would be explained. These posts were made by a user by the name of Cessier, who would be credited as the original creator of Jeff the Killer long before the 2011 story ever existed. Over the years, Cessier would try to take the rightful credit for his story back, claiming that every version of the character outside of his own was a fake, an endeavor that he would blame for the suspension of his YouTube account when it was taken down for supposedly violating YouTube's terms of service. Whether you believe those claims or not, there is no denying that the 2011 version of Jeff the Killer is a work of plagiarism, stolen directly from this original work. And that much is apparent both when looking at the timeline of events, as well as the similarities between both GameFuel TV's and Cessier's version of the story. Taking a look at the now archived version of the 2008 video, we get an idea of what elements were stolen from the original story, as well as what was changed. The video is only 2.5 minutes long, and the majority of it consists of random photos and text that tell us nothing. So it'll be really easy for me to just quickly run through the relevant information with all of you. The story of Jeff in the video goes as follows. Here's a little story about Jeff and his brother Lou. You might be wondering how his face looks that way. It's a long story. I'll tell it to you soon. Jeff's brother, Lou. He was very popular and a ladies' man. He's a very nice guy once you have a beer with him. Jeff in his mid-teen years. In this picture, he was teasing Lou by wearing his glasses. Jeff was indeed doing the world a favor and killing the humans that infest the world. He'll fucking cut you. This is the whole story so far. Jeff was hauling a gallon of acid into the bathroom to clean out his bathtub. He slipped on a bar of soap in which he fell, and the acid splashed all over his face, damaging his face. The neighbor heard his cries for help and took him to the hospital. Lou was at work, but came over to the hospital as soon as he heard what happened to Jeff. Never again was Jeff the same. So that was the original Jeff the Killer lore, and it's certainly something, alright? The video does not tell us much about the character, and some of the random facts it includes are, yeah, they're interesting, but right off the bat, we can very clearly see what elements were taken from the original story and what was changed in the 2011 version. Jeff still has a brother named Lou who seems to have a close relationship with him. He's still a murderer that sneaks into people's homes to kill them, and his appearance is still the result of a freak accident. This time around though, Jeff and Lou are a pair of adults. There's nothing stating Jeff was ever bullied or murdered his family, and instead of bleach and fire, his appearance was caused by severe chemical burns. We also get some more information about this version of Jeff in the 4chan thread. It goes into further detail about the living situation of the brothers, as well as what happened to Jeff following the accident. It explains that Lou had a job as an accountant, taking care of both himself and Jeff while they both lived in the same house. Jeff would often try and help out by keeping the place clean, using large amounts of acid to clean out any mildew whenever he saw it. One night, while Jeff was cleaning out the bathtub, he slipped on a bar of soap and spilled the acid all over his face. The accident led to him being hospitalized, and soon after, he was offered a prosthetic for his face, leading to the appearance of Jeff shown in the photo. As far as I know, that was where the 4chan thread had ended. The only other lore we could be provided for the character came from Cessier's Newgrounds account, where he and other users often participated in Q&As as well as short role plays that involved the character. From these Q&As, we were able to learn the timeline of events that eventually led to Jeff's full transformation into Jeff the Killer. Here it is stated that Jeff's accident left him in the hospital's care for roughly 10 months, with him experiencing a complete mental breakdown the moment he got back home and took a look at his face. 1 month after said breakdown, Jeff began developing what was described as murderous schizophrenia on November 10th, and his murders happened only 1 day later. Following this, Jeff went on a murdering spree, with the cops following close behind him. Somewhere down the line, Lou started killing people, seemingly to protect his brother, and from then on, it just starts devolving into a bunch of roleplay lore that isn't really relevant to the video. That was all the lore I was able to uncover about this version of the character, and honestly, I do not know how I even feel about it. Like, on one hand, yeah, it's not well made as a story at all. It's just as campy and poorly made as the 2011 story that copied it, so much so that I would say it's worse in some ways. However, I also really can't give it much flack because this wasn't really made to be a super iconic story on the internet that everyone would talk about. It's very clear this was just made by some kid at the time who wanted to share the lore of his roleplay OC, and it didn't go much further than that. So I don't really see the point in being overly critical of it. I just see this story as an incredibly interesting part of the character and story's history. I'm very happy that after all these years, the original creator was able to get credit for his creation and more people were able to recognize as much. Regardless of my own opinion of the quality of the story, I do think providing credit to creators is incredibly important, and this is a case where it was desperately needed. All of that being said, with what I've just described to you, you can probably imagine why Jeff the Killer over the years had become quite a bit of a laughingstock of a character. It feels like his iconography comes entirely from a place of the time in which his story was made as opposed to anything else. And that much slowly became apparent to the creepypasta fandom as Jeff went from being an extremely popular character unironically to being the punchline of practically every joke you could think of. It was because of this shift in the community's view of the character that the decision would eventually be made to remove the 2011 story off of the Creepypasta Wiki entirely. See, the Creepypasta Wiki had a great deal of quality control. If you wanted to upload a story on there, it first had to get by the mods who would look it over, and if it didn't meet their standards, it wasn't accepted. The 2011 Jeff the Killer story bypassed these quality control measures purely because of the story's iconic status, which understandably made many authors upset. As a result of this, the story was eventually taken down, much to many fans' dismay. For a bit, it seemed as though there was a divide in the community. Some users were happy it was gone, and others felt that it was too iconic to simply be deleted from the wiki. The reason I bring all this up is because the moderators of the wiki at the time had a solution. A contest. A contest which challenged any creepypasta authors to try and step up and provide their own rewrite of the story to act as the official replacement to the 2011 version. This contest was held, and in 2015, the Banning K Jeff the Killer rewrite was made. Let's talk about that next, shall we?
Hello there, it is me, the one and only Jeff the Killer, here ambushing you in this dark, dreary forest.
Wait, this is supposed to be in a forest? Alright. And there. Alright.
For one purpose, and one purpose only. To sell you... Shit! To sell you one-of-a-kind Clyde the Killer makeshift plushies. Now available at makeshift.com for a limited time. Get your hands on it while you still can, or else, ooh, we are gonna have problems. Let me tell you about this. I am going to sneak into your house. I am going to Jeff the Kill your mom. I'm gonna Jeff the Kill your dad. I'm gonna Jeff the Kill your... Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
I am Dalton.
On September 26, 2015, the contest to rewrite Jeff the Killer would end. Of the 15 submissions, one would win, and that would be the now well-known Banning K Kellum interpretation of the story. To this day, this version of Jeff the Killer is considered the official remake of the story, being the one that comes up when you look for the character on the Creepypasta wiki. And I am just gonna be upfront and say it, I think this is a very good story, but not my favorite version of the character. To show you what I mean, I think we should first look into what this story does differently from the other two interpretations we've discussed already, as well as what it does the same. First things first, it should be known that the rules of the contest the story was written under stated that each entry had to follow a similar structure to that of the 2011 creepypasta. It was stated that Jeff needed to start the story relatively sane. He needed to experience some kind of life-changing, traumatizing event which involved bullies to some degree, and he needed to become the killer by the end of the story. The Banning K rewrite follows this formula to a T. In fact, this entire thing just reads like the 2011 story, but written in a much more grounded, realistic fashion. Jeff and Lou still move into a new neighborhood with their parents. They still get bullied by Randy, Troy, and Keith. The cops still get involved. Jeff still gets scarred in a final fight with the bullies. Everything is still there, but now it all makes sense and serves a proper narrative. For example, Jeff's feeling he gets throughout the story. In the 2011 one, it's just his urge to hurt people, which he gives into and uses to kill the bullies by the end. In this version of the story, it's more like his deep inner rage, which he constantly represses because he doesn't want to give into it, which works very wonderfully in this setting because the tragedy of the story is that we have a character like Jeff, who knows he has the capacity to hurt others and fears that side of himself, forced into an environment where his patience is constantly tested by every aspect of his new life. Randy is now the son of a rich man who also happens to be employing Jeff's parents, so they and the police turn a blind eye to the bullying he receives as a result. Lou, instead of being sent to juvie, is sent to live with his aunt after he and Jeff begin acting out rebelliously, leaving Jeff completely alone in a setting where nobody has his back. This version of the story allows you to really, truly understand the struggles of this character. He isn't just some edgy badass who happens to snap. He is a truly troubled person trying to be better but struggling to do so because of everything around him. which makes it really tragic when the accident happens, which leads to him becoming Jeff the Killer. See, in this version of the story, rather than having all the bullies show up with guns to some random party, Jeff is instead forced to spend time with Randy as an arrangement from his parents. They want Jeff to get along with their boss's son and as a result, leave him in their house so the two can bond. At first, it seems like the two actually get along. Jeff apologizes for fighting him earlier in the story, Randy seems chill, and all is well. At least until Randy has the bright idea to take Jeff to his garage and show him the flare gun his father owns. At this point, Troy and Keith show up and it is revealed that Randy plans on getting revenge on Jeff for beating them in the aforementioned fight. Here is where Jeff finally snaps, beating up Troy and Keith and going for Randy, who panics and ends up shooting Jeff in the face with his flare gun, leading to his disfigurement. After the accident, Jeff's parents arrive and find him knocked unconscious, his face severely damaged. He is taken to the hospital where he slips in and out of consciousness. During those brief moments, he can hear his mother talking to the doctors about his condition, saying that she can't have him looking like that because of what it would mean for their family's reputation. He also hears her lying, claiming that he shot himself with the flare gun, taking the blame off of Randy. This is what leads to the ending, where Jeff is taken home, kills his mother and father, and leaves Lou alive to find their bodies. The set of events I just described to you encompasses everything I love and everything I dislike about this interpretation of the character. Because on one hand, it fixes every major issue the 2011 story had. The final fight with the bullies is set up in a much more natural fashion. Jeff's disfigurement actually makes sense, and his reasoning for snapping and killing his parents makes way more sense than him just randomly deciding to do so after leaving the hospital. That being said, this set of events also exemplifies the major issue I have with the story overall. Because while this is a very well done story that makes Jeff and the characters around him significantly more compelling, I cannot say at any point that this story is at all scary. By painting Jeff in such a sympathetic light, by making his actions in the story damn near justified, it made it incredibly hard to find him scary because it felt like I was supposed to be rooting for him. That, and with how it ends, it's very clear that this version of Jeff is only out to kill his parents and maybe the bullies afterwards, which I feel really takes away from the scary urban legend aspect of the character, the idea that this guy is out there and could sneak into your house to kill you. My other big issue with the story, albeit this one being way more of a nitpick, is the fact that Jeff's design was kind of lost in translation here. Maybe this is just a me thing, but I feel like the design of Jeff the Killer, as shown in the photo, is so iconic that no matter the interpretation, it should be reflected in the story. The 2015 rewrite does not make any attempt to do this. Instead, after the accident with the flare gun, Jeff's design is described as something closer to that of Two-Face than the original character. The flare caused scarring on specifically one half of his face, creating a mark which looks similar to that of a half smile, and causing Jeff to become blind in one eye. This was it for his appearance, no carved smile, no pale complexion, nothing. And while I do understand why this decision was made, and feel it makes the story infinitely more grounded than its two campier counterparts, I also feel that a large part of the character's identity was sacrificed to do so. All that being said though, I do still like this story. It is an overall well-made piece which shows us what the 2011 creepypasta could have been if it was written by someone more competent. The characters are compelling, the descriptions are vivid and paint a gruesome picture at times, and it was cool to see how it was well received enough that Banning K would continue to make it a whole series after, which I unfortunately still need to read. Is it my favorite interpretation of the character? No, admittedly. But it is still very much so a worthwhile read if you like Jeff the Killer just as much as I do. Now, with all of my opinions on this rewrite out there, I will admit that while reading it over again for this video, a part of me got really curious. If this story was the winner of a contest, what was its competition like? Because for all the things it did effectively, I did see my own personal issues with it. And that really got me thinking about whether or not I would have even voted for that story if I had read it when the contest was still going. So I did some digging, and eventually, wouldn't you know it, I managed to find the original page on the wiki where the rewrite contest was held. And alongside it, every single entry for the contest, every Jeff the Killer rewrite that didn't quite make the cut. And I read them. I sat down and read the top 5 winning entries, Banning K included, because I really wanted to give every one of these stories a fair chance in my own book instead of just dismissing them as the entries that lost. Now mind you, I didn't end up having much to say about all the top 5, and there were way more entries than those initial ones, so on this part of the video I only really intend on taking a look at the 3rd and 2nd place winners. That being said, if people are open to it in the future, I totally could go back and read every single entry that was made for the contest. Could be a really fun project to work on, who knows. Actually looking into these 2 other entries, starting with the 3rd place winner, I was very pleasantly surprised by this story. The 3rd place entry was written by author Jay Zoidberg, and oh boy do I love the approach this person went with for it. The entire story is framed not from the 3rd-person perspective we become accustomed to, but rather as a first-person testimony given by a police officer by the name of James Lamb. James was working the case of Jeff the Killer, trying to find out where he was hiding after he'd murdered the mother of a rich family named Tabitha Cromwell that lived in their local area. This investigation led him to Lou, who he found out was serving a sentence in a juvenile delinquent center. Lou gave his own testimony explaining that Jeff as a young child always struggled with severe anger issues that nobody cared to keep in check. He said it was like all his other emotions were muted and empty, with his rage being the only real feeling he knew how to express. This made Jeff the target of bullying from good old Randy, Troy, and Keith, who would harass him enough that Lou began walking home with him every night for protection. This didn't stop them from showing up one night with a knife though, which led to an altercation in which Jeff ended up snapping, stealing the knife from Randy and stabbing him to near death with it. Lou would end up taking the blame for the event to defend his brother, being sent to court in Jeff's place and being given an extremely severe sentence, as it turned out Tabitha Cromwell was Randy's mother, and she was not about to allow her child to take the blame for the altercation. Lou was sent away, and it was revealed that after Jeff was left alone, nobody left to defend him. Randy and his friends attempted to get revenge on him by sneaking into his home one night and lighting him ablaze with gasoline and matches. Jeff survived, completely lost it afterwards, and began his murderous rampage throughout the city, killing every single person who had, in his mind, wronged him or his brother in some way. The story eventually comes to an end as it's revealed that James planned out a sting operation to finally catch Jeff by manipulating Lou into trying to meet his brother in person, only to let him go upon sympathizing with him. He realized in that moment that Jeff was a scared, angry child who was never given the opportunity to grow, and despite knowing it was wrong, he couldn't bear to bring him in. This ending acts as a sort of confession, an old cop's admission of guilt for letting a killer go because he felt the world wasn't fair to him. And that is Jay Zoidberg's rewrite of Jeff the Killer. I really like this one. It isn't without its faults, but overall I think it's a very good reimagining of the character. Telling the story from the perspective of a cop's testimony instantly allows Jeff to play a much more antagonistic role in the story, especially at the start. For the first 2/3 of the story, Jeff is made out to be this terrifying urban legend in the local area. People say his go-to-sleep line like it's a quote from a movie. The media sensationalizes his rampage to a point where he's made into some kind of boogeyman, and any and all eyewitness accounts of the character always make him out to be some kind of ghastly monster. This story really paints the picture early on of Jeff being this scary character who slinks into your house at night and kills you while you sleep. And yeah, at the end it absolutely does make him out to be much more sympathetic, which was the main issue I had with the Banning K version of the story, but in this one I'm not nearly as bothered by it because it feels like an effort was made to make Jeff an antagonist here. Jeff not being the protagonist of the story does wonders for his character. It allows us to see his story from an outside perspective. We don't know everything right away, only learning bits and pieces as this cop goes over his extensive research trying to catch this notorious serial killer, and realizing over time that the story is not as one-sided as it was initially made out to be. There was also some very strong world building here, with us being given a very strong sense of this town and the way the law operates here. This was an element of the story that I also thought the Banning K story did fantastically, so I was really happy to see it properly followed through with this one as well. As for my issues with the story, I do have a couple. The first one, which is not a big deal, is that there were a few very noticeable spelling mistakes and grammatical errors that popped up from time to time in the story. They weren't frequent enough where it felt like the whole thing was thrown together haphazardly, but I did notice them from time to time during key moments in the story, and it absolutely did take me out of it. The other issue I do take with the story is that ending. I see what they were going for, the cop sympathizing with this killer because of everything he heard and letting him go, but I'm not the biggest fan of the outcome of that. Because at the end of the story, Jeff's murders come to a complete and total stop. He just disappears without a trace and seemingly stops his murders because of a change of heart. I don't know if this is just me misinterpreting the story or something, but I just do not think that's how the story would end at all. Jeff throughout this story is depicted as someone who is completely snapped and gone over the edge. There is a vivid description of how his victims were violently mutilated at the scenes of the crimes. This guy may have been sympathetic in the past, but his actions now are still very much so that of a deranged serial killer. To have the cop who's been following him this whole time let him go was already a bit of a stretch I was willing to accept. But to also say that it made Jeff just stop killing people entirely because of a supposed change of heart, I feel just goes against everything we've seen that character do prior. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it absolutely was something that bothered me, especially with how invested I was in the story leading up to that moment. Overall, this rewrite is really solid though. It effectively set up Jeff as this spooky urban legend, had a very compelling structure it followed with the first-person account from a jaded cop, and it was able to ground the story much more in reality like the other solid rewrite I've already talked about. I could totally have seen this one winning as well if those two complaints I had were better executed. Moving on, we have the second place winner, which I do not feel the same way about. This story was written by author Sirius Nightshade, and I just want to say right off the bat that I really hate this one. I don't mean to be rude to the author or anything, but this particular interpretation of the story is basically everything I don't like about early creepypastas wrapped into a single writing piece. Actually getting into it, the Sirius Nightshade rewrite begins with a very familiar setup to most other Jeff the Killer origins. We follow Jeff as the main character, who lives with his mother all alone, and his social and home life here is far worse than any rewrite has ever depicted it. His parents are divorced, and his abusive father has custody over Lou, meaning the two characters never get to interact outside of phone calls. His mother is incredibly absent, and while he starts out with a good life at school, being relatively liked by his classmates, that takes a turn for the worse once he starts getting bullied by good old Randy and his crew. In this version of the story, Randy starts going after Jeff after he attempts to comfort his girlfriend upon finding out he was cheating on her. Viewing Jeff as competition, he began spreading rumors around the school that Jeff was a psychopath because he saw him stepping out of a mental health clinic at one point, and practically everyone turns on him. This causes Jeff to go down a violent mental spiral until eventually he snaps and uses a switchblade to carve his signature smile into his face, and he goes on a murdering spree. He breaks into Randy's home, kills him, and then moves on to his dad, who he murders in an attempt to save Lou. Lou refuses to go with him, now scared of what his brother has become, and the story ends with Jeff on the run as the now infamous serial killer Jeff the Killer. From the basic synopsis, you'd probably wonder what it is I hate about this story compared to everything else I've talked about on here. It shares a pretty similar structure, has all the same beats and characters, and doesn't really deviate in any way you'd expect. The answer to that is two very glaring issues I have with it. The first and most apparent being Jeff's actual character arc. See, in every other version of the Jeff the Killer story, even the shitty 2011 one, it was established very early on that Jeff had the capacity to become a serial killer. In the two 2015 rewrites we just talked about, that much was apparent. That is not the case in this one. Yeah, Jeff is depressed in this story as a result of his home life, but that is pretty much it. He is a very normal, sympathetic guy. He never showcases any violent tendencies, he's never made out to be this potentially dangerous character. Hell, the reason he gets bullied in the first place is because he cares enough about one of his classmates to let her vent to him. All that to say that this version of Jeff has practically no reason for why he snaps and becomes a killer in the first place. Halfway through the story, while sitting in his room thinking about all the terrible shit that's happened to him, he just randomly snaps with nothing even provoking it and begins carving a smile into his own face. There isn't even an inciting incident like in every other version of the story. No fire, no chemical burns, no flare gun to the face. Nothing happens in the story to give Jeff that last push into becoming Jeff the Killer. He just suddenly decides to start killing people. And with how normal this version of Jeff was leading to this moment, it just feels really contrived and extremely rushed. My other massive issue with this story is how much it relies on pure shock value near the end for the sake of scaring or disturbing the reader. I was not ready for some of the things that would be described in this story, and quite frankly, I am not comfortable getting into it because they are things I do not want to talk about on here. All I will say is that this rewrite goes a lot into topics of sexual abuse in very descriptive detail, and it does so very poorly. It adds nothing to the story, just thrown in there completely arbitrarily to try and shock the reader near the end, and I just found it to be extremely distasteful in its execution. This story overall just left a very sour taste in my mouth. It gave us a very poorly written version of Jeff who becomes a serial killer for practically no reason, and it relies so heavily on shock value near the end that it practically ruins the entire experience. I genuinely don't know how this one even got second place, especially with how much more I liked the story that came right before it, and how much better the first place story ended up being. After finishing this in the third place entry, I feel like it does put it a bit better into perspective why Banning K's entry was the one everyone accepted. It was a very well-written story that respected the source material and tried to tell as faithful an interpretation of the 2011 version as possible. While I do love the third place entry and feel it very easily could have been the winner as well, that one very much so felt like a more unique spin on the character that deviated far from the source material. That's what I loved it for, but in a rewrite contest filled with fans of that 2011 story, I feel like the clear winner is the one that follows that premise more closely and much more effectively. As for second place, I feel like it did not even stand a chance against the Banning K story. It also chose to follow a very similar structure to the 2011 one, but its rough, contrived execution and over-reliance on shock factor just made it pale in comparison. With all of these rewrites said and done, the contest over, and Banning K as the winner, Jeff the Killer as a story would not be picked up again for quite a long time within the creepypasta community. The 2015 story would be considered the absolute best version of Jeff the Killer for years, up until the creepypasta community had a small resurgence 4 years ago near the end of 2020, where horror YouTuber David Neer would post a new entry in his horror series, The Morgue Files, titled Jeff the Killer. Let's take a look at that next, shall we? Oh boy, the Morgue Files. Let's talk about the Morgue Files. This entry right here, this is my favorite version of the Jeff the Killer story. The second entry of the Morgue Files series, David Neer's Jeff the Killer, is everything that I wanted this character to be, and a bit more. It stays true to the origin of the character and his family in such a way where it always feels like the Jeff the Killer we know and love, while also changing small things to make the story scarier and set up many future entries. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Morgue Files, it's an audio horror series which goes into the history and stories of a bunch of different creepypasta characters, attempting to put them all in one massive conjoined universe. It isn't read out like your typical horror story narration, with the story instead being conveyed purely through the voice acting and audio design heard throughout. This format right away felt like a breath of fresh air for me, as it really stood out amongst all the other stories I had read prior for this video. It also stood out in the way that this was the very first version of Jeff the Killer that I can confidently say I didn't have any major issues with. Now, because you've already heard Jeff's origin time and time again, and this story is pretty true to form for the most part, I'm only really gonna get into what this version does differently compared to everything else. The first thing I noticed right away when getting into this story was the sheer amount of effort it put into giving us a well-realized, realistic interpretation of the events of the 2011 story. Jeff is immediately described as having albinism, a rare genetic condition in which the body has a lower amount of melanin than usual. Because of this, Jeff became the subject of bullying, leading to him dyeing his hair black to try and make it less noticeable for those around him. From the very beginning, I saw what this story was trying to set up, and I was all for it. And that much continued to be the case as I got further. Jeff's characterization is also incredibly good here. Instead of having this feeling that is described throughout or an indescribable rage he tries to repress, Jeff here is simply depicted as an incredibly unstable individual. He flies off the handle at the smallest of remarks, leading to him becoming extremely hostile and at times violent. His family has no idea how to help him with it, with his father choosing to ignore it and his mother being incredibly overbearing at times towards him. All of this culminates into a version of the story where you can sympathize with Jeff, but he is still scary. He is clearly mentally ill in some way and isn't provided the help he needs for it, but his actions throughout the story often affect people who don't deserve it, and he makes no attempts to be a better person on his own. All of that, as well as the many new details about Jeff's personality that are included, which are meant to further foreshadow the path he takes. David Neer wanted this version of Jeff to feel like a realistic serial killer, and you can see as much with many of the scenes depicting his behavior early on. He kills and mutilates small animals, watches and stalks a girl from his school obsessively, and fantasizes about the ways he killed people just because they get on his nerves. He has all the makings of a real-world serial killer long before any bullies or accidents that tip him over the edge, and it makes him really unsettling here. Is it a bit on the nose and cliche for him to be written this way? Yeah, a bit. And sometimes it took me out a little. But I think overall it benefits the story and allows Jeff to feel a lot more grounded than he usually is in these rewrites. And speaking of the bullies, one thing I really like here is the way the bullying and transformation of Jeff is handled. Instead of being harassed by the likes of Randy, Troy, and Keith in this version, Jeff instead gains a level of notoriety in his new town amongst several different groups of characters who have it out for him, which eventually culminates in the transformation we all expect him to have. He beats up a bully in his school named Spencer, steals a knife from a gang of thugs after his old one was taken by the school's principal, and gets into constant fights with his family, which leads to them being afraid of him. What this all leads to is a horrifying set of events which eventually push him over the edge, allowing him to become the character we all know and love. It starts with him, shortly after being attacked by Spencer as revenge, going into a store to try and buy alcohol. He leaves the store, but has a run-in with the thugs he stole the knife from and is knocked out. When he next awakes, he finds himself on the ground surrounded by thugs, and he's beaten to a pulp by the man he stole from, the bottle of alcohol he purchased bashed over his head. The thugs try leaving him, but one specific, especially sadistic member of their crew arrives and decides Jeff hasn't had enough. He carves a smile into the boy's face to the other gang members' disgust, and just when they thought he was done, he pulled out his lighter and lit Jeff ablaze using the alcohol that covered his body. Jeff was believed to be dead, left in a puddle he ran to put himself out. But he miraculously survived and was saved by a passerby who found him barely clinging to life. This was Jeff's breaking point. From here on, he gave into every violent urge he had. As soon as he could walk, he found where the thugs were hiding and brutally killed those responsible for his maiming, returning home and continuing the killing spree with his parents, Lou, and then his bullies as well as the girl he had stalked. He didn't stop there either, making a point to kill whoever he saw along the way before finally being arrested after murdering the parents of a woman named Jane. That is how the Morgue Files version of the story ends, and oh my god if it isn't terrifying! This interpretation of Jeff's origin and transformation into a serial killer is every bit what I wanted the Banning Cave version to be. He is made sympathetic, yes, but by the time he becomes Jeff the Killer, you are in no way rooting for him. He becomes an absolute monster, murdering his parents and other innocent people like they're nothing to him. This final act of the story feels less like a creepypasta and more like a slasher story with the way it plays out, and I cannot think of a better climax to Jeff's story. The only thing I will say about it at times is that it does tend to get a bit campy near the end when the story was more grounded at the start. Some characters behave in a ridiculous, over-the-top manner, especially Paul, the thug who lit Jeff on fire in the first place. But that is much more a nitpick, if a complaint at all. I like my stories with a bit of campiness, and it's Jeff the Killer we're talking about here. It's not like this is a 100% realistic story to begin with. I also love so much how Jeff's original design was given a proper, realistic explanation here that didn't feel contrived. The mutilated smile, the burnt features, the pale skin, all of it was kept perfectly intact without any massive jumps in logic to make it possible. And that is something I really, really love. Jeff aside, I also think what makes this climax work as effectively as it does is the genuine attempt throughout the story to make Jeff's family flawed, but sympathetic people. His father is neglectful at the start and comes across as extremely cold and uncaring, but later on when Jeff is found after the fire, he is heartbroken. He tries to get the family help after that, so Jeff can come home to a household that welcomes him. But that change of heart comes too late because the next time he sees his son is when he returns home to kill him. His mother is written to be extremely overbearing and overly emotional, but it's clear she does love him and has no idea how to get through to him or how to help. Jeff himself even feels a tinge of guilt in killing her, but does so anyways once he's snapped. And finally, there is Lou, who is a very different character from what we're used to here. Lou is written in a way that is meant to set up Homicidal Lou, a creepypasta in which he becomes a serial killer after the events of the 2011 story. He is shown to be a deeply disturbed individual himself, who ends up coming into contact with another creepypasta character, Mr. Widemouth, and who ends up developing a personality disorder halfway through the story in the form of a second personality named Sully. Lou is a very interesting character whose behavior can be seen as a response to the neglect of his parents in the same way it can be observed with Jeff. He loves his brother and parents and constantly tries to get their attention to no avail, which makes it especially tragic when his own brother attempts to murder him. The way this entire family is written is great to me, because by the end of the story, I did not want to see any of them die. They are flawed individuals, some of which do some very cruel things throughout the story, but they are never depicted as being downright evil towards Jeff to the point where you want to see them killed. It makes Jeff's actions at the end far more scary, which was what I wanted to see from all the versions of the creepypasta I read prior. It does an excellent job at making the story more compelling without justifying Jeff's actions, and it also sets up the larger universe that David Neer wanted from the series with every other character, like Homicidal Lou, Jane the Killer, and Mr. Widemouth being clearly established. I genuinely believe that if you want a true-to-form retelling of the 2011 Jeff the Killer story to listen to, this should be the one you check out. It's very clear there was love and passion put into it, and it fully realizes the potential that I think this character has to be truly terrifying. All that being said, with the release of this entry of the Morgue Files, that would really be it for Jeff the Killer rewrites and stories for the next 4 years. Some small fan projects would come out that starred the character, but nothing as big as David Neer or Banning K's work would come out for a while. And that is where I come into the picture. Since my channel had started, I had always wanted to do a rewrite of some of the classic stories I loved from my childhood, and upon doing a massive poll to see which one you guys wanted the most, Jeff the Killer was the winner. I was ecstatic over this, as Jeff the Killer was easily the one I wanted to do the most, if that much wasn't apparent. And so I got to work on my own rewrite of the story, which was released on this channel and on my Tumblr account in July of this year. And I'd like to talk about it. Obviously not in the same review type way I've talked about everything else up to this point, but instead in a bit more of a behind the scenes kind of way, which goes over the whole process I took to make it. I thought it would be a really fun way to end this long video that's very personal and sentimental to me. If you have not heard/read the rewrite yet, I highly urge you to before we start this section, as I will be spoiling it and would hate to ruin it for you. With that out of the way, let's take a look at my own interpretation of Jeff the Killer. So one thing I want to get out of the way right off the bat when talking about my rewrite is what the intention behind the story was. When I sat down to make this rewrite, I was not setting out to create the new definitive version of Jeff the Killer. Instead, I wanted to create my own version of the character based on the elements that I liked about him, with the parts that I wasn't a fan of taken out entirely or changed. In order to do that, I first asked myself the question of what elements of Jeff's story did I feel were too iconic to his character not to keep, and what elements did I not care for. Upon asking myself that, I made a mental list. I decided that Jeff absolutely needed to have a brother in the story named Lou. He needed to be bullied at some point by Troy, Keith, and Randy. He needed to eventually be disfigured in some way, leading to the design shown in the photograph, and he needed to attempt to kill his family. These were the aspects of the story that I had to represent in some way. Everything else could be changed or removed as I saw fit. As for the elements I didn't like, this was actually where the initial foundation for the story was set. My two biggest glaring issues with most versions of Jeff the Killer was that I did not like when he was written to be the protagonist of the story, and adding on to that, I did not like when he was written to be very sympathetic. Now, don't get this twisted, this isn't me saying that I do not like stories where the main villain is also the protagonist, because I absolutely think this can work when done right. My problem with this more so stems from the fact that I don't think it suits what most versions of this particular story go for. Jeff is a character that is scary because he works as a spooky internet ghost story, the urban legend of a serial killer who will sneak into your room at night to kill you. By making him the main character, I feel like unless it's done really well, that element of the story drags down his appeal, especially when he's made out to be sympathetic or justified in any way for his actions. Once I ironed out the parts of the story I did and didn't like, it became very easy to start plotting out what my version of Jeff would look like. I wanted my Jeff to lean heavily into being an urban legend, the kind of character that becomes the talk of an entire town and whose identity is defined heavily by the game of telephone everyone's descriptions of him become. In order to achieve this vision, there were multiple changes I went with right away before anything was even written down. Firstly, Jeff in my story was going to be pure evil right from the get-go. This was literally the very first creative decision I made, and I made it for what I thought was a very good reason. Not only did I do it because I felt the less sympathetic Jeff was, the scarier he would be, but I also did so because I knew that nobody would expect it. Jeff's story has been told a million times over, and in practically every single version of it, he is a character who you can sympathize with to some degree. Because of that, an expectation was set for Jeff to always be written that way, and I knew that if I played my cards right, I could subvert that expectation in the most horrifying way possible when I would inevitably reveal it was never the case in my rendition. Now, in order to do that, I needed to set it up properly. If I made Jeff too evil, then it would be obvious, but if I made him act like a saint, then it would feel unearned and contrived when I would reveal his true nature. That was why I decided to build the entire story around the idea of this plot twist. I thought about ways I could foreshadow it and always ended up keeping the ideas that would imply his true nature, but could be misinterpreted by both the characters and the reader because of their preconceptions about who Jeff was. Perhaps my favorite example of this kind of foreshadowing was the direction I ended up taking Jeff's disfigurement. See, with every version of the Jeff the Killer story, there is always that one moment which I've taken to referring to as the inciting incident. That moment where Jeff finally hits his breaking point after some kind of freak accident leaves him horribly disfigured. When this moment happens, it's supposed to signify Jeff's full transformation into Jeff the Killer, and it's usually followed by the story's climax. To subtly imply the direction I was taking Jeff's character, I decided to have this accident happen before the events of the story, as if to sow the idea into the reader or viewer's mind that either this inciting incident had already come to pass, or that those events were irrelevant and he was always evil to begin with. This decision ended up making several other aspects of the story easier to write as well. The fire that caused Jeff's disfigurement was a good way to explain the family moving to a new town. It allowed the bullies to have a more natural reason for going after Jeff in the first place. It made Jeff more sympathetic in the eyes of the viewer or reader before they knew any better, and of course, it also gave a plausible excuse for Jeff's more alarming character traits so it wasn't immediately obvious what his true nature was. For example, his habit of fidgeting with his old lighter. At first, this could be taken as a stress response, with the lighter being the only one of his possessions that survived the fire that caused his disfigurement. It's only after the big reveal that he caused the fire that it could be seen as a red flag, as the actual reason for his constantly playing with it was because of it being a physical manifestation of his desire to hurt people. I hid little bits of foreshadowing like that all over the story under the guise of them being relatively harmless, so that when it was eventually revealed what kind of character Jeff really was, everything would finally click and the reader or viewer would feel the same horror the characters did. As for the second major change I made in order to make this story fit the urban legend vibe I wanted, this version was going to be set up as a crime-themed mystery story with a pair of cops as the protagonists as opposed to Jeff. I made this decision for two reasons. First of all, I did it because I felt that setting the story up this way would allow Jeff to flourish as a villain. He could be this mysterious force that was active behind the scenes, always driving the plot forward even when he wasn't there. I felt it would make him much scarier, and the story following an investigation would allow viewers and readers to very slowly learn more about him as it went on. The other reason I chose to structure it in this way is much more simple. This is my favorite format of storytelling. I love writing and engaging with well thought out mysteries where the audience feels just as involved as the characters and where they are rewarded for paying close attention to every detail that was deliberately placed for them to find. I wanted to make a story that could give everyone who engaged with it that level of satisfaction, and I set out to do so with this rendition of Jeff the Killer. Now, with those two major changes decided upon and my vision for the story clearly established, I set out to begin writing the first draft of the story. And I did not end up keeping that first draft around for very long. See, the initial story I wrote for this Jeff the Killer rewrite was both very similar to the final result, but also couldn't have been more different. It still opened with the cold open kill of Jay Douglas, it still starred our two cop protagonists Samuel Morgan and Norman Keller, and it still had a first-person account of Jeff's origin from Lou, but everything else was different. The first two chapters showed our two cops investigating Jeff, but by chapter 3 they had already found Lou, and from there on the entire rewrite was just Lou describing the events of Jeff's origin. I ended up scrapping this draft very early into writing it because I really hated it. The cop characters felt half-baked and pointless to the story. It didn't at all feel like a crime mystery which built up Jeff's presence in the world, and Lou's section was far too long and was filled with pointless plot points. So I scrapped it, keeping the aspects I liked, and started again from scratch. This time, to get the atmosphere I wanted, before I even started writing the story's second draft, I made a large document meant to act as a sort of guide for myself. In this document was a description of the setting and the little tidbits of world building surrounding it, descriptions of characters and how they should act, and a brief outline of all the chapters as I planned them out. As well as this, I made a mood board which was meant to capture the overall vibe of the story. I would always turn to this mood board when trying to describe the setting and characters so that a very vivid picture could be made in the mind of the reader about what kind of place Carpenter's Landing was. With this much more organized approach, I could plan out the events of the story to actually make everything naturally flow, and I could introduce characters who didn't feel half-baked. I wanted to write characters for the story who were all flawed in one way or another, and created a setting that allowed for that to be the case. Carpenter's Landing is this shitty location which is defined by its run-down concrete architecture and rampant crime and drug abuse. It's a place where a serial killer would thrive, and it enabled me to make these characters the flawed yet sympathetic people I wanted them to be. Perhaps my favorite example of this when writing the characters was the two cops, Samuel and Norman. These guys were so much fun to create because they allowed me to make my own rendition of the usual good cop, bad cop trope and put a unique spin on it. Norman is written to be this reckless, overly enthusiastic rookie cop who constantly makes brash decisions that work out for him, but could also easily blow up in his face. He's meant to complement the depressing setting the story takes place in by providing a bit of levity to the scenes he's there for. Samuel, on the other hand, is Norman's polar opposite. He's meant to be this very jaded character who's seen enough and is desperate to catch Jeff. His desperation makes him go along with his partner's reckless decisions, and later on in the story it causes him to do things that actively break standard police practice, like when he promises Lou that he'll kill Jeff when he does find him. These versions of the characters only came to me after organizing my thoughts for the second draft, and I am so grateful I did because it actually made them interesting people to write and engage with instead of being glorified framing devices. The other big thing that came from this second draft was the decision I made to double down on the different perspectives by making this rewrite a proper anthology story. I made this decision because I felt it would provide a very unique way of engaging the viewer with the mystery that also complemented the overall theme. Each testimony described in the story is meant to be filled with small inconsistencies between one another. Jeff's appearance and mannerisms are different each time. Small details are described close to one another but are never completely the same, and events are given to the reader/viewer completely out of order. The whole idea here was to create a mystery where nobody is a completely reliable narrator, and those following along have to try and solve the mystery alongside the detectives by piecing together what little consistencies are actually there. Hell, even Lou, who appears in the story to provide the true set of events near the end, does not provide a complete picture, which is showcased in Jeff's chapter when it is mentioned how annoyed he is about Lou getting parts of the story wrong. I wanted every account of Jeff in this story leading up to the final chapter to feel like hearsay. All these things did happen, but nobody remembers them exactly as they were. This was supposed to make Jeff feel like a boogeyman of sorts, a character whose origin, appearance, and motives are wrapped in mystery, even by the end where they are seemingly fully explained. I know not everyone was super keen on this approach from me, as it was very different from what the original did, but I genuinely could not be happier with this approach. I feel like taking the story in this direction allowed me to fully realize the vision I had for it while also making an engaging mystery. And speaking of that mystery, one last thing I want to touch on with my rendition of this story is what is probably the most divisive part of it, the ending. I have seen a lot of discussion about the way I chose to end this story. Some people love it, and others see it as a lazy cop-out. I do see both sides of this discussion, but being completely honest, this ending was what I always planned for the story. In making this entire rewrite one big mystery that was all about piecing together your own interpretation based on the details you were given, I wanted the ending to reflect that. This story does not end on a cliffhanger that will never be resolved. It has been resolved. There is an answer to who won the fight at the end between the two brothers, and I know who it is. The ending is one that I left largely up to interpretation, but it is also one where you can figure it out based on the context clues left throughout the entire story. You just need to pay close attention to what is said and what happens. I understand that approach to ending a story may not be everyone's cup of tea, but that was the vision I had for it from the start, and I find myself very satisfied with it. And I feel like that is very reflective of my view on the rewrite as a whole. Like I said at the start of this section, I more so made this story for myself than anyone else. I set out to make my own version of Jeff in my style, and if people ended up liking it, then great. But if not, then I would just be happy knowing that I made the version of the story that satisfied me the most. That being said though, I cannot stress enough how overwhelmed I was by the positive reception this story had received from the creepypasta community. I never could have predicted the sheer amount of support this thing would receive upon finishing it, and even now recording this, just saying that feels surreal. This character, as stupid as it may sound, has left such a massive impact on me as a person. He was my introduction to horror as a whole, and he acted as the face of the fandom I am the most passionate about even today. And now I can say that I somehow managed to create a rendition of this character and story that genuinely made a mark on that same community and got people talking about him again. I think about that and I'm just at a loss for words. I never thought in a million years I could be in the position I am today, where I can have any form of impact on these communities for the better, yet here I am. I guess all this to say, thank you. Thank you to everyone who decided to give my rewrite a shot. Thank you to everyone who made it far enough into this video to hear me go on yet another sappy rant because I am way too passionate about niche things on the internet. Y'all have really given me the opportunity to live out my dream here, and I will forever be grateful for that. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of our little adventure through Jeff the Killer's history. It was quite a bumpy roller coaster of a ride, but here we are at the end. If there's one thing I hope for this video, and any future creepypasta uploads I do, it's that these characters and stories will continue to be talked about in the future. They played such a pivotal role in my childhood that I do not want them to just fade into obscurity, and it makes me very happy to see that I, in some way, was able to help stop that from being the case. If you made it this far, then I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I genuinely cannot wait to see you here for whatever my next project ends up being. Goodbye for now.